Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about conversions. Today we're going to be talking about two different type of conversions, the conversions between fractions, decimals, and percents, and the conversions between scientific notation and standard form. Remember, after watching this video, if you have any questions, make an appointment at the Genius Bar, and let's get started right now. So here we are talking about conversions. Let's start by taking a look at a few key ideas. Here we are at our first key idea. And our first key idea is to convert fractions, decimals, and percents. So we've got a nice flow chart set up here that's going to allow us to flow from fractions to decimals and percents and back the other way. So I'm going to start on the left-hand side arrow where we're talking about going from fractions to decimals. So the fraction I've chosen is 7/100ths. So I'm going to convert 7/100ths to a decimal. And the easiest way to do this is to take my numerator and divide it by my denominator, or divide the top by the bottom. So I'm going to take my calculator, I'm going to divide 7 by 100, and when I do that, I end up with 0.07, or 7/100ths. And you can see that my 7 is in the hundredths place, and I also had 100 in my fraction. So even though I could use my calculator to divide it, it is easy to tell that, hey, if I just look at the place value at the bottom of my denominator there, that's going to be the same place value for my decimal. And that is going to be an interesting thing that I can use to then go from decimals to fractions. So talking about going from decimals to fractions, let's take a look at our decimal. So the decimal I've chosen here is 0.008, or 8/1000ths. So I'm going to take my decimal and now move it to a fraction. This is a little bit trickier than just dividing the top by the bottom of my calculator. The way I'm going to go about doing that is the denominator will be the place value and the numerator will be the decimal's numeric value. So what do I mean by that? So I'm taking a look at 8/1000ths. So my denominator is going to be 1,000 because my 8 is in the thousandths place. And my numerator is going to be 8 because that's the numerical value of my decimal. So for example, I've got 8/1000ths. Now, I have to always, anytime that I'm making any conversions to a fraction, at any point in time this entire year, I need to make sure that I reduce my fraction into simplest forms. So in this case, 8/1000ths can be reduced to 1/25th. So anytime that I'm converting a decimal to a fraction or a percent to a fraction or anything to a fraction, or I am writing fractions, I should always write my fraction in simplest form. That will be a rule now, it'll be a rule tomorrow, it'll be a rule all the way until the end of the year. So we want to make sure that anytime that we have a fraction, we want to write it in simplest form. So that handles one side of our flowchart. We can go from fractions to decimals and decimals back to fractions. So now we need to go over to the other side of our flowchart. We're going to work with decimals and percents. So I'm going to again start over on the far right, and I've got 0.49. That's my decimal, and I'm going to move it to a percent. Now there are two ways to do this. One that we use our calculator, and the other that's a little bit of a shortcut. So I've got 0.49, and the first thing I'm going to do is anytime that I want to move a decimal to a percent is I'm going to multiply by 100. I can multiply by 100 in my calculator. I get 0.49 times 100, and that's going to give me 49%. That works every time I can use my calculator. However, there is a little bit of a shortcut. The shortcut is I could move my decimal place 2 places to the right. So if I were to take my decimal point and I were to move it 2 places to the right, that would also give me 49%. So you can see here, I'm going to take my pencil, I'm going to draw my decimal place 2 places to the right, and when I do that, I still end up with 49%. All right, now I'm going to take a look at my percent, and I'm going to move that to a decimal. So my percent here is 32%. So again, there's a way I can do this in my calculator, and the first way to do that is to divide by 100. So if I take 32, divide it by 100 in my calculator, I'm going to end up with 0.32. So I've got myself a decimal. That worked. However, there is a shortcut, and my shortcut for this side is I could move my decimal 2 places to the left. So this time I could move my decimal 2 places to the left, and I would end up with a decimal. So I'm going to take my pencil, draw 1, 2, and I've got 0.32. So again, if I use my shortcut, that also works. So either way, I can use a calculator, I can use my shortcut. Both of those methods work to turn a percent to a decimal. Now, there is one key thing that you need to look at in this flowchart. There is no direct way to go from a percent to a fraction. There just isn't a way to do that directly. The only way you can do it is to turn them into a decimal first. So it's very important to understand that any time that we're going to be working with different types of numbers, fractions, decimals, percents all together, the easiest way to do anything with them is to turn them all into decimals, because that's the one that can all be turned into. Fractions can't be directly turned into percents, and percents can't be directly turned into fractions. Now, there are two conversions that memorize. You have to memorize these because they don't really work out in your calculator all that well. So the first one is I got to memorize 1/3. So 1/3 is also equal to 0.3 repeating, or 33 1/3%. Not 33%, 33 1/3%. So this is the way that I need to memorize these, because again, your calculator is not going to do a super great job of showing you 1/3 in your calculator or 3333 repeating. So that's one we have to memorize. And the other one that we need to memorize is 2/3. And again, 2/3 is 0.66 repeating and 66 2/3%. Maybe you already had those memorized, great. But if not, you're going to want to memorize those conversions now, because it's going to be much easier for you to remember them now because you're going to be using them a lot later on. Let's take a look at our next key idea. Here we are at our second key idea. Our second key idea, we're going to be talking about conversions with scientific notation. So the first thing to understand about scientific notation is an easier way of writing bigger and smaller numbers. So now we're going to be talking about moving one thing from standard form to scientific notation and back the other way. So again, we have a flow chart. It's a little bit simpler than our last flow chart. So we're going to start at the top, and we're going to be taking our scientific notation number there, our 6.2 times 10 to the negative fourth, over to standard form. And the way that we're going to do that is the exponent shows how many spaces to move our decimal. A positive exponent means we move to the right, and a negative exponent means that we move to the left. So in this case, I've got 6.4 times 10 to the negative fourth. So I'm going to start by taking a look at my exponent, show how many spaces I'm going to move. So in this case, I'm going to be moving 4 spaces because I have a 4 in my exponent here. So I'm going to be moving my decimal 4 places or to the left. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to fill those spaces with zeros. So I'm going to be writing zeros in there to fill that in. So for example, I'm going to end up with 0.00062. And I know that I'm going to be moving my decimal to the left because I had a negative exponent. So my negative exponent meant that I'm going to move to the left. I've got 3 spaces after the 6. Once I've moved it 4 times, that gives me 3 zeros there. Now you're thinking to yourself, hey, that exponent says 4 and I ended up with 3 zeros. Yes, it's very tricky. The exponent does not mean the number of zeros. You cannot look at the exponent, go 4, and determine that means 4 zeros. Okay, so you have to make sure that you're counting correctly. In this case, I counted 4 spaces, so I moved 1 for the 6, then 3 more. That's where the zeros come from. The next thing I'm going to be doing is moving my number from standard form, so in this case I've got 4,300, over to scientific notation. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to place a decimal point after the first non-zero number and count the numbers from the decimal to the end of the number. If I have a really big number, it's going to be a positive exponent when I'm done. If I have a small number, it's going to be a negative exponent when I'm done. So over here I've got my 4,300. I'm going to put a decimal point right here after my first non-zero number. So I've got my 4, and that's not a 0, so I'm going to put a decimal after that. Then I'm going to count the number from the decimal to the end. So I've got 1, 2, 3. So I counted 3 times. And since I can see this is a large number, it's not a small decimal, I know my positive exponent is coming. So my number is going to look like 4.3 times 10 to the positive third, because I've got a bigger number. Now, is 4,300 the biggest number that we can have? No, but it's not an itty bitty tiny decimal, so therefore I'm going to have 4.3 times 10 to the positive third. So that's how we're going to convert numbers from standard form to scientific notation. Now let's try some practice on your own. So here we are at practice number 1. The top row says to convert these numbers to standard form. The bottom row says convert these numbers to scientific notation. I want you to go ahead and pause the video now, try these 6 on your own, then press play again to see if you have the correct answers. How did you do? Were you able to get all of the correct answers? If you did not get the correct answers, make sure that your paper matches mine, and then you are done with these set of notes. Last video, if you like this video, go ahead and throw us a thumbs up. If you love this video, go ahead and throw us a sub, and we will catch you in the next one.